Thank you again to Jose and HubSpot for sponsoring the Sales and Biz Dev track. We'll now start off with our first session, Customer Needs in COVID-19, how to stay in tune with your audience during rapidly changing times. COVID-19 represents unprecedented opportunity to either get left behind or address the real and new problems. During this session, we'll discuss specific and actionable ways to stay in tune with your audience so you can understand where they are today and anticipate what they need in the future. We'll explore ways to connect, collect data, and take action on these insights. Without further ado, please welcome AJ Davis, the founder of Experiment Zone.
Hey everyone, really great to be here. Can you guys see my screen? There it is, perfect. All right, thanks for everyone for tuning in. And don't forget to include your questions in the chat today, so we'll be happy to answer those at the end of the session. All right, so what are we going to be going over in our 45 minutes today? We're going to be talking about what has been the customer impact of COVID so far, how to stay aware of your customer needs, how to understand where customers are today and what they really need and how they're being impacted. We're going to anticipate emerging needs moving forward. And then we're going to talk about how to adjust your approach to getting the data you need to be able to be prepared for all these coming changes. So I'm AJ Davis. I'm the founder of Experiment Zone. I love helping companies understand how to improve their customer experiences to lead to growth and more revenue. And I really think that this is quite an unprecedented time, as we all know, and the power of data and research can really propel your business forward and help you stay relevant. And you can reach me here. Be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn as well. Let's get to it. So the customer impact of COVID-19. Let's do a quick rewind of the last crazy 6 months plus. So, in the early days, the Clorox wipes flew off the shelves. We saw hand sanitizer, toilet paper, all these things suddenly had a huge surge in demand. These made sense because these were directly correlated to COVID-19. But as we saw other changes in people's lives, we saw other products really shift. So we saw, for example, jigsaw puzzles went through the roof over the summer. And then we also saw bread makers, vacuums, and a whole host of other things surrounding this at-home concept really change. So through all of this, we see we may have predicted some of these, we may not have predicted some of these, but we're really seeing at the root of it, customers have different needs. Customers are having a different experience day to day. And it's our job as marketers and salespeople to stay on top of these trends and to keep the conversation going with our customers. So Bain has done some research. This was released in September, the end of September this year. What have we seen so far? What do we know? So where customers are spending, how they're spending their time is really shifting. They're spending a lot more time at home. Their priorities are shifting. There's a huge focus and shift to health. And then we're also seeing a major shift from what used to be offline interactions now being online. So we know that the step change into online, we're seeing much more adoption to online platforms that focus on health and wellness. We're also seeing a shift in the definition of value. So we're seeing what customers' perceptions of value has been changing, and then that shift to home. So we're spending less time in an office, more time on virtual meetings and at home with school for our kids. There's a whole bunch of things that are impacting and really moving us into the home. So where are some of the questions at this top level heading into 2021? There's big questions. So what's going to stick? Which of these changes are really going to be things that are substantial? Or which of these things are going to just be small shifts, temporary shifts, the run on toilet paper, for example. So what else continues to shift? What other new things emerge as the high demand product, the high demand problem that people are solving? And where are some of these new problems going to emerge as people are, as winter's coming for much of the country, in terms of being inside more? What is that going to cause? What kind of shifts are going to change for customers' needs, their pain points, their frustration, and then ultimately where your business fits into that? So a lot of questions remain about, local versus big brands. Will they continue to buy local as we've seen, or are they going to convert to these single stores that they can get everything? There's a trade-off now emerging between sustainability versus safety. So how do we have that balance? How are customers going to strike that moving forward? There's also a big question mark about urban versus suburban and rural areas. Where are people going to be living? And what's the longer term impact of the shifts that we've seen so far? And then there's a question of science and what types of things will matter in terms of building trust. What kind of data do customers need to make decisions moving forward? Will they need more proof that something's effective, or are they going to be more skeptical of some of the things tied to the way we message our products? So why should we care about any of these things? We know it's having a big impact at these top level behavioral things, but what does it mean for your business? Well, if you aren't staying in tune with what your customers need, you can really lose out on your competitive advantage. So where you are in the market today, you could easily slip to someone else who's really quickly adapting to what else is there. The market's not going to look the same on the other side. It doesn't look the same as it did in February, and it's not going to look the same on the other side. We see from past pandemics and epidemics that we see shifts in how people design their homes and their workplaces, what their expectations are for school and technology. So we've seen it in the past, and if the past can indicate where we'll be heading, we're certainly going to be seeing something different. And then the last thing, why should we care about all these shifts, is that we've got a lot of data. And so this old customer data from the before time, it doesn't reflect or predict the current needs. A lot of the models that have been built up over time are failing to predict where we are now or what's going to be coming next. So it's essential that rather than relying on old needs and old things that we've identified, that we stay on top of what's going on. So those are the treetops. That's the whole environment we're in. But what can you do about it for your customers and for your conversations? It all comes down to asking questions and listening to your customers. So as we see, customer needs are changing, and this can change in all kinds of ways. We're seeing that they're changing rapidly. In the early days of all this, just like those news reports, we saw that customers would suddenly need toilet paper and it'd run out. The flour was running out and vacuums are running out. Refrigerators are running out. So we're seeing consumer goods as an example and a leading indicator that customer needs are changing rapidly. People are jumping on the bandwagon to understand what they need, and they're all going to go get it. So there's this kind of herd mentality to go out and solve these problems in case there's a scarcity issue. Because we live in the US and we haven't had a lot of issues with scarcity before, we are now seeing that people are more aware that this can happen, that the breakdown in the supply chain can happen. And so they're responding more quickly in anticipation and understanding of what's already happened. And so as we move forward, you could anticipate that this scarcity concerns could really drive more of customer needs. We're also seeing hugely different reactions based on customer segment. So whether you're a stay-at-home parent or you're an entrepreneur who lives with friends, or you're any of these other different demographics or income ranges, what your job is, these have huge impacts on what your needs are. So the amount of PPE needed by a hospital worker is very different than someone working in a restaurant versus somebody who's able to work remotely at home. But their day-to-day is really impacted differently too. So if they're in the house more or less than before, relative to each other, their income levels, their job stability, all these different factors are playing into the types of reactions people are having. And so we may need to be thinking about our customer segments differently, and even going back to those initial sales personas. What do those people need now? What's different about them? Are we even thinking about the personas in the right grouping or the right attributes around the persona? So we really need to kind of take a step back and understand each of the persona types that we had before have different needs, different problems, different goals, different ways they're spending their time than they've ever had before. And things are pretty difficult to anticipate. It may be fairly straightforward to anticipate some of the things like PPE and gloves and masks and things that are really closely related to the pandemic. But there are a whole bunch of other things that are a lot less transparent or easy to understand. What's the impact to workers who are at home now? and their communication needs. What's the impact as you're trying to grow a business and had to lay off some of your workers, or maybe bringing them back on, and what are some of the challenges there? So in all these different scenarios, all these different things that may or may not happen in the future, it just amplifies the uncertainty that we might have about what customers are ultimately going to need. So talking to your customer, having conversations, getting feedback from them, understanding their problems, these things are all more important than ever before. And we have the tools for it, which makes it possible for us to navigate this. So I want to introduce user research. This is a general concept that just focuses on understanding what are customers' behaviors. What are they really doing today? That can be things that they do that we can quantify with analytics. These might be things that they can describe as how do their typical day looks like. User research also focuses on their needs. So what do they not have? What is falling short in their world? What do they not have to support those behaviors and to make those easier? And then lastly, there's an understanding of the motivations or the emotions and context for the user. And so if we can use user research techniques to understand these three things, we'll have a better understanding of where we are today and a better chance of anticipating where we're going to head. So what's the toolkit look like for user research? So from the wavy data, which is the qualitative data, to like firm numbers on the quantitative side on the right, we can also break down what are the behaviors and why are customers doing it, those motivations. So the tools that we have to get to some of these answers is we can split test different messages on our site. We can split test different product solutions in our email messaging. We can look at analytics to understand where have there been shifts. For a lot of businesses, they're seeing large increases in traffic to their site, but where's that traffic going? What are they engaging with? We can also use click tracking analysis to understand what elements of your site are engaging to customers. Are they seeing certain things that are important? So these are really like the what. What are customers doing? Where are they seeing? And then on the other side of things, we've got usability testing, first impression testing, interviews. These require more of a conversation with your customer. And this is where a lot of what I'm talking about today is focused. So being able to stay ahead of, are there different pain points as people are more distracted with kids running around in the background? What does that mean for usability in your software tool? Are there different impressions or different reactions to the type of messaging you're putting out there into the world? And interviews are really going to be the place where we can go really deep and ask a lot of questions. Surveys are a great way to get a broader sense of what's happening among your customer set, whether that's directly on your website through an intercept survey or through an email list that you may have already gathered of existing customers. Card sorting and tree testing is a way to make sure your navigation is staying relevant. And then heuristic review and expert review are great tools to be able to have someone else weigh in and bring that fresh perspective. Are you communicating effectively in our 2020 environment? So let's break it down to how do we understand what's going on right now for our particular customers. So to get a pulse on today, why is it important that we even have this pulse? If it's different than it was before and we have an understanding of the before and it's going to be somewhere different, why does it even matter that we have any understanding of today? Well, life is changing really rapidly. And there may be pain points that you are thinking you solve, but don't exist anymore. So if you're solving problems for an office space and people aren't going to the office, that pain point has shifted, but it still may exist in a new form. It may also exist alongside new problems. And this is really helpful when you think about having your initial sales conversations or what you put on your site from a marketing perspective. If we understand that we solve this problem, but we can help adjust these other problems, but now customers have focused in on these adjacent problems, we can shift our messaging. We can shift the conversation to really focusing on the new problems, the bigger problems that our product may already be able to solve, but just hasn't been in the limelight for something that people needed to talk about. And the other thing you can do is have a much bigger impact by keeping your ear to the ground. So just by staying on the pulse of your customers, what are they getting from other experiences with other businesses? You may find that there are new things that are coming out that you could apply to your business. The early days with curbside delivery and then home delivery and all these other things. There's all these little small pieces to that experience that if you just ask your customers, what does your day look like? And what has created friction or what has brought joy for you? These little moments can help inform the way that you design your products, talk about your products, and get it out there in the world. So what I would recommend for businesses today, things have already changed a lot. And historically, we tend to say, let's develop our personas. Or let's solve this let's uncover more information about this specific problem. And we tend to shape very specific research questions that then we go answer by talking to a certain number of people, having a focus group, kind of testing out different things. But what I would encourage you to do right now is to think about just listening and getting a better sense of what's going on and having them happen regularly. So if on some regular cadence, once a week, a few times a month, every quarter, you get on these regular questions and conversations to just take a step back. You can ask questions about what's going on and understand the current context. And coming into those with a more kind of open-ended willingness and curiosity to understand what's going on is going to help uncover things and issues that wouldn't have come up in a more targeted research study. So what I would recommend is writing down a set of questions and talking to 3 to 5 customers on some frequency with those exact same questions. And that's going to give us more of a over time perspective of things that might be emerging as pain points or potential opportunities for your business. By asking the same question, we'll be able to start seeing if something's shifting, if there's increased anxiety or something's causing bigger frustration about working at home or having the kids at home. And so by having those on repeat rather than changing them each month, it allows us to just have a constant baseline of what's going on rather than trying to kind of like follow certain paths that may emerge and go away. And then the other thing that you can do is create just a simple survey question and capture customers where they are, whether that's on your website, within your product, on social media. And again, just keep it available so you can get that constant input of what's going on and start to understand, are there things emerging that we just didn't know about? So what should those questions be as you're taking the time to have a one-on-one conversation or setting up a survey? These should just be very general, very open-ended questions. In general, with user research, we want to make sure that we're asking open-ended questions rather than yes/no questions. We also want to make sure we're not leading. So rather than saying, how exciting was it to use our product today? And what did you love about it? We just might ask, what are you using our product for today? What did you think of it? We might ask about what surprised them about using our product. And then we can also ask, what's the impact on our product, whether it's their personal or professional lives? So getting a sense of where do we fit into this picture? And that way, as we ask these questions over time, we can see if we're becoming more central to their business or to their lives, or perhaps there's some new feature that became really relevant that the second question can help us surface. And then I like to ask this very general kind of blue sky question. If you could make any change to our product today, what would it be and why? And oftentimes we may get a list of features from this question. We might get very specific things that are just please go make this one little change. We may get really complicated things where we don't have a technical solution for it. But the real value in this question is that sometimes you'll uncover pain points that don't come through these other questions. If only I could do this on my phone, if only I could do this in this other context. And that might unlock an understanding of other problem areas or new needs that might be emerging. Okay, so we talked about how do we capture what's happening today with customers, but how do we anticipate the future? And the Bains and the Accentures of the world, they're doing large-scale surveys to understand and anticipate future needs, but they're still left with some question marks, as we should be. There's so many different scenarios that could be playing out, whether it's COVID related or politically related or related to the economy and jobs. There's big questions out there. So how do we anticipate that future state and then understand our customer needs within it? And this is a really hard question. So let's talk about how we might uncover them. The first thing we should know is that customers just generally cannot predict their own behavior. If you just think about our resolutions at the beginning of every year, I'm going to run every single day for 10 miles. People have very optimistic senses of self and what they're going to be able to do. But when we actually look at their real behavior, so the classic example is, what people say they'll watch on Netflix versus what they actually watch is quite different. They think they want to watch documentaries or things that have won awards, but then they end up watching reality TV shows and things that are just kind of relaxing and not as intense as what they might have identified as their ideal. So in general, we don't want to be asking the question of what do you think you'll need in a year? What do you think you'll need in 10 years? I don't know. I certainly wouldn't have known last year for myself what this year the needs would have been. And especially in an environment with so much unpredictability, we really cannot rely on customers being asked the question to predict their behavior. So what can we do instead? So we need to focus on today. And we need to talk about where their struggles are. We also can start taking a look back at what had been and what is today, and really digging into the differences in between. So what has the impact been? What has changed in your day-to-day? And yes, there are these big top of the tree types of things we've already covered. I'm spending more time at home. I'm working from my computer in my home office. But you've got to dig in deeper and really understand, in the context of your product, in the context of your service, what has changed about their needs and the people they work with and the surrounding factors for using the product. And then you want to just keep track of that over time. So how have these needs evolved throughout COVID? And what's great about needs as opposed to behaviors is that we can start to understand where these things are shifting over time. And so we may be getting some inspiration for things that may not predict future behavior, but might showcase emerging needs that then correspond with future behavior. The important thing is to just always be asking these questions and to keep the conversation going. So who should we talk to in order to understand these future needs? I've been talking a lot about current customers. So we do want to talk about what's happening today. How are they using our product? How has that changed? Who are they using it with? How has their experience changed? Are they struggling with anything new within it? So getting a real sense for that core. We've already got them. They're already our customers, but let's learn from them as much as possible. The other thing we want to do is to talk to the target niche. So if you're in sales, you're talking to folks like this every day. So we want to make sure we're asking these open-ended questions to keep an eye on what new things are emerging for the target niche. And generally, these are the two groups that we talk about when we think about customer research or market research. We want to be thinking about our niche and current customers. But where this changes for 2020 and beyond with COVID is we should be casting a wider net. We need to be looking at adjacent populations and what their needs are, because we may find there were things that we rolled out before that now our solution solves, or there's a new pain point that's emerged that we really think we can make a difference in. And if we stay focused on our target niche and our current customers, we're going to completely miss it. We need to cast a much wider net with who we talk with. So make sure to think broader, be creative, ask more questions in new spaces. And just this is our only way we can find these new opportunities that are emerging so quickly. Okay, so we talked about who to talk to. We talked about not to ask for future behavior, but to kind of understand what's happening and what new needs are there today. But what can we ask them? And I wrote customers here. It could be all three of these groups. So customers, your target niche, and the broader set of people. What has 2020 done to impact your life? And give them space to finish this whole sentence, right? This whole paragraph, this whole story. It's a disservice that we have if we jump right into understanding the impact to our business without understanding this broader context. Many times in the before times, we could make some assumptions about their broader context. But because this is changing for life and the day-to-day life for everybody in all these different ways, we need to sit with this. And it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable to hear it in a lot of cases. But let them get that out. It's going to build trust. It's going to give you a better understanding of how they answer the other questions. You want to ask them about feelings. So like, how do these changes make you feel? What has the impact been to your emotions, to your mental health, to your ability to sleep at night? Now, we're not trying to play psychologists. We're not going to solve the problem for them, but we do at least want to understand this context they're in, because somebody who is enthusiastic or joyful or focused has a very different response to an interface or to a product than somebody who is scared or anxious or easily distracted. So understand where your customers are within these different emotional sets so you can better communicate with them. Ask them about both ends of those. So they may have said how they felt now, I feel anxious, I'm not sleeping. But you have an opportunity to kind of get a sense of what has the year looked like for them. So are there things that have brought them joy or happiness or satisfaction this year? And what does that look like? Again, as we go through some of these questions, we probably do want to start narrowing it down. So if we're talking about the business context, you might frame this as what at work has brought you the most joy this year, or what has collaboration with your colleagues brought the most joy this year. So you can narrow these questions and phrasing in, but the idea is, can we ask them to go to that place of satisfaction? And what has that shown? What has emerged there? And then what has brought the most pain? And so within that, we may find, I'm, delighted that I can present at a conference and meet people virtually throughout the year. And I love that people are on board with this. And that will give you kind of a different sense of the behaviors, some of the emotions around it. But what has brought you the most pain professionally? Not being able to go out for drinks with my colleagues. Hey, that's a pain point. Can we solve that with some sort of technology solution or other ways of creating that community? And then what has changed the most within this realm for this year? So this question gives us the chance for them to kind of step back and reflect on what's the thing that brings the most joy, the most pain, but then where are we seeing the biggest shifts? Not just surface level, but in using our product, in collaborating with our teams, in home care, whatever space you're in, just ask them in their minds what has changed the most. You could also approach this from the flip side, what has changed the least? And that way you get a sense of where are these variations taking place? And then what's surprised you the most about what's happened since earlier part of 2020 and now? And this will give you a sense to really hone in on what are the things that were not anticipated or new pain points or things that are emerging in that way. And through all these questions, you don't just want to ask them and let them finish. You want to listen for the pain point and then ask follow-up questions. Why did that make you feel joy this year? Why did that surprise you? What was it about it that surprised you? Were there tools or technologies that helped achieve this thing that brought you joy? And so you can really dig into any of these questions individually to bring out what's going on today. So, customer research in a COVID-19 context. What are some things that we need to keep in mind? In my mind, the biggest thing is that on both a personal level and a societal level, people are worried, they're fearful, they're anxious, and this can impact everything about their lives. So if anxiety levels are high, imagine you're creating a product for somebody to use while they're driving. Well, if anxiety is high and fear is high, how does that impact driving? How does that impact safety? How does that impact the importance of the message around safety around driving? Even if driving isn't the thing that's being directly impacted by COVID, anxiety can just seep into all parts of how we interact. It can cause people not to sleep. It can just create a general level of distractibility. And so creating an interface, we need to make sure we're giving people really clear focus areas. Here's your call to action. I'm going to make this as easy as possible for you, even if I'm not doing something related to these heavier, bigger fears that are going on in your world. And we'd be remiss to not think about this. If we're just thinking about people need toilet paper, people are buying board games, like people are doing all these things, there's a big emotionally going on in the whole world. And we need to keep that in mind as we're talking to people for research and as we're thinking about what's the best way to approach sales and marketing in this time. Another shift that I'd recommend as you're talking to people is we want to be a little bit more patient in our research. We want to give more space to answer questions, to think about what we're asking. And when we're doing something that's task-based, so something like usability studies where people will walk through your interface and give specific feedback, we just want to give them a little bit more time. If they are feeling anxious, it might be hard for them to focus in on the right things. It might be hard for them to answer questions. And so being cognizant not just of what you're trying to learn in the session, but also the impact to the person you're learning from. So just increase your patience and level of empathy as you talk with people. And you want to balance how much you show compassion and empathy. Oftentimes with research, we're looking to kind of remove ourselves as a variable. But at the same time, if somebody has gone through something very devastating, we want to acknowledge it and give them space to kind of compose themselves and come back to the point of the study, but not dismiss it entirely. We want to make sure that we give them that space to process it. And then if people need to step away or reschedule, like give them the time to do that. They're doing us a favor by letting us learn from their experiences. And so we need to be able to return the favor with some compassion and empathy. And then the last tip I have for doing research with COVID-19 is to set really clear expectations for the conversations. Because we may be asking much broader questions about what life has looked like, how it's impacted them and their family, their professional world, we want to give them some sense of what this is going to be like in the conversations. So if they're coming into it with some anxiety, we want to make sure that we're not potentially, creating, we're asking you suddenly to talk about the worst thing that's happened this year. Oh, I thought I was talking about this software product for productivity. Kind of set some expectations. We're going to be talking about a lot like this broader set of things so that people can be more emotionally prepared to step into this. There's a question here, which was, how many questions would you recommend asking in order to gain valuable information without wearing them out? This is a fantastic question, and this relates very directly to this last bullet around expectation setting. So in general, what we want to do with conversations, and in particular like this research context, is we want to set expectations for how long it's going to be. And then we want to time out our questions so we can manage the rhythm of the session. And so the answer is not like a certain number of questions to a certain amount of minutes. But if you say, the goal of this is to understand their context, understand the problems, and get there, it's a 45-minute session, you may end up with 20 questions or 25 questions. Some of them might be quicker questions and some of them might be these more open-ended, longer ones. So you just want to be able to pre-plan and scope out These are all the things I want to ask them, and I anticipate it will take about this much time to answer them. One of the tricks that we have in user research is that we will do like a guinea pig session or a pilot of the session where we'll actually test out, are my assumptions about the length of time for the session and for the length for each question accurate? And what's great about that is it gives us a chance to adapt so that, the worst thing that can happen is you've got 5 minutes left and you're like, I've only got 20 more questions for you. And they're going to feel so anxious and so stressed out about that. So the other thing is, taking your question into the context of a survey. We want to make sure our surveys are pretty simple and straightforward. People have even more going on around them. And if they haven't dedicated the time to you to have a conversation, just give them 1 to 3 questions and leave it at that. So I'm going to leave you with 5 tips for today for what to do to get a handle on what's going on in the world today with your customers. So focus on connecting with your customers remotely, whether it's interviews, Zoom calls, surveys. Increase your frequency, check in early, often, and ask those same questions over time to get an understanding of what's happening. Leave time to explore the anxiety and emotions around this year, and make sure to reflect on the questions you ask so they don't come across as tone deaf or lacking an understanding of this broader context that we're in. Make sure to ask about what has been, what's the difference in your past behavior, as opposed to asking customers to anticipate their future behavior. And instead focus on uncovering needs. What needs exist today that might help us understand as people who are in this space and can phrase our products differently? How do we speak to that need or address that need with our product? And then make sure to explore that broader context, both with who you're talking to and what questions you're asking. That's where some of these amazing insights are going to come from, the adjacent audiences, and just getting a sense of where you fit into the whole ecosystem of people's new world. Some tools and technology for remote research. There's a handful of tools out there that make this super easy to get in touch with your customers and to get in touch with research participants. You can also find participants if you're looking to understand your niche audience or that broader market through respondent or user interviews. And then there's some great tools for first impression testing, as well as some tools for understanding how people structure and think about your product. And with that, if you need any help understanding customer needs with everything going on this year, check us out at Experiment Zone. I'm also launching a podcast this week called Startup Insights. So you can find my podcast on soundcloud.com. Each week, we're going to be going through and interviewing a startup on how they're approaching research. And with COVID, there's a lot of uniqueness coming out. So be sure to check it out if you're looking for some ways to do this. All right, let me know if you have any questions. All right, great. Well, we'll stay tuned for any questions coming through, but thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy to stay around and chat. Hey, Erica, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you again, AJ, and to Experiment Zone for putting together that session. That was awesome. We have, it looks like, one backup question from the audience. What is the best way to infuse usability research into your optimization program?
Yeah, I could spend an hour on talking about this specifically, but when you think about optimization, you want to be thinking about research at 3 different points. You want to think about it in the early days of understanding what's the current context of what's going on. You want to spend time understanding any particular solutions you're going to put out into the world. Are you putting the best foot forward, whether it's through an A/B test or a change you're making to your site? And then lastly, when we see behaviors that don't make sense, don't have a clear explanation, usability research is a great way to answer, why did customers do what they did? Customers aren't very predictable or consistent, so we've got to keep an eye on why they might be responding in a way that isn't anticipated. What are some of your tips for running A/B tests for collecting data? Great question. I think for, at the high level for A/B tests, what we want to be thinking about is having a really specific hypothesis ahead of time. So when we think about a change that we're making, and then we're going to change that against what exists today, what do we think is going to really move the needle for people, and where is it going to change it? So we want to make sure we're thoughtful about which metrics are going to be impacted, where they're going to be impacted, and then set that up so we have all the data we need to have a clear story at the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It doesn't look like we have any other questions from the audience. Would love to just give you a chance to do any closing remarks you have. And then after that, we will be taking a short break before diving into session 2.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening in today. I know the world's rapidly changing, so I hope that this was helpful as you think about how to stay in tune with everything going on. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, everyone. We will be cutting to a quick break and back in a few minutes for session 2.